PastRadio.
London has many moods, but few so unsettling as the one it wore that late October evening. A heavy, muffled stillness, as though the city were holding its breath. The fog pressed low against the windows of Baker Street, attempting to smother the flicker of the gas lamps. Holmes was at his chemical table, coaxing some sinister vapor from a beaker, when he suddenly looked up and said, "Watson, would you be so kind?" I glanced up from the evening issue of the Times, puzzled. "What do you?" was all I managed before a sharp knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, hair slightly disordered, a slip of paper balanced on a silver tray. She muttered something about not being a maidservant in her own house as she retreated, clearly roused from a well-earned nap. Holmes chuckled. "Formidable woman," he said with genuine affection, rarely on display from him. "Please read it, Watson." He wiggled his fingers theatrically, encased in a pair of unshapely, heavily blotched mittens, their mottled surface recalling the unhallowed experiments of the modern Prometheus. His hearing was uncanny. He must have caught the telegraph boy's arrival, even through the din outside. I unfolded the flimsy sheet. The telegram was brief, its urgency unmistakable. "Mr. Holmes, stop. Require your assistance. Stop. Extreme urgency. Stop. Please come at once. Stop. Signed, Edwin Mallory, Clerkenwell." Holmes's eyes brightened with that unmistakable spark, like an eager hunting dog fresh on the trail. "Mallory," he murmured, "a renowned craftsman's name. I wonder what requires such urgency at this hour." "Come, Watson, we are needed." Edwin Mallory's workshop sat above a narrow lane, its windows glowing faintly through the fog, like the eyes of some mechanical creature. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of oil, and the uneven chorus of clocks of every shape and size ticking, as though each kept time for a different world. Mallory himself was pale, exhausted, and visibly shaken. He thanked us for coming and then pressed a small wooden box into Holmes's hands, with the desperation of a drowning man offering proof of the sea. Inside lay a worn and dented pocket watch. His voice trembled slightly as he explained it had belonged to his elder brother Elias. "He died 3 days ago, yet this arrived by post this morning, with his note written in his own hand." Holmes retrieved his magnifying glass and examined both items under the lamplight, turning them this way and that with the delicate precision of a surgeon. Then he handed them to me. The note was brief but chilling in its simplicity. Instructions for a meeting that very night, urging Mallory to come alone. Holmes's expression softened, a rare thing. "I hope your father was eventually able to make his peace with your brother," he said quietly. For a moment, Holmes's gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the cramped workshop. A flicker of memory, private and unguarded. Then the moment passed, his composure returned like a curtain falling. Mallory swallowed hard, his eyes glistened, but he merely shook his head, unable to speak. Holmes inclined his head in a gesture of understanding, or perhaps apology. Then he turned sharply toward the door. "King's Cross Rail Yard," he said. "We are running late." The rail yard at night was a desolate stable of titanic steeds. Engines loomed like slumbering giants, flanks slick with soot. Lanterns swung in the chill breeze, casting skeletal shadows across the gravel. "Come, Watson, let us not keep our ghost waiting. The midnight hour is nearly upon us," Holmes murmured. He kept to the darkness, stalking like a hunter on the trail. I followed his lead, scanning the pockets of deeper shadow for any hint of movement. For a moment, the scene blurred into memories of Afghanistan, the tense stillness before a Ghazi ambush, the sudden eruption of shouting and gunfire. My old Giselle wound began to throb, right on cue. I shuddered from more than the autumn chill. I wished I had my Webley, but I could not have wished for a better comrade to have my back. Holmes paused, raised a hand to signal me to hold here, and slipped away into the gloom. Within seconds he had vanished entirely. My grip tightened on my cane. A minute passed, then another. Whatever Holmes thought he had seen, perhaps he had been mistaken. Then a grunt of pain, a heavy thump. The unmistakable scuffle of bodies struggling in the dark. I forced down the instinct to call out and moved, trying to balance speed with stealth. Holmes might be in need of my help, but without my revolver I needed every advantage I could muster. Holmes, skilled at boxing and no stranger to the tricks of street fighters, had advantages I lacked. I, on the other hand, had only my cane, a poor substitute for my old service revolver in close quarters. Then silence. I advanced carefully, toward the direction the sounds had come from, praying Holmes had prevailed. At last I spotted him, locked in a restless hold with a slender man, both of them breathing hard. Holmes looked up and waved me over. "There you are, Watson. Good of you to finally join us. Let's have a chat with our secretive friend here." The man's ears twitched at the mention of my name. "Watson? If you are the writing doctor?" "Then you know precisely who I am," Holmes interjected. "The question is, who are you, and why are you passing yourself off as the late Elias Mallory? Watson may be the medical expert, but I am quite certain you are alive." The man blinked, relief washing over his anxious features. "Oh, thank God. No, I'm not Elias Mallory, but I saw him die, and it was no accident." We followed the man to a dilapidated tea kitchen nearby, a place the yard workers used on long shifts. He kindled the stove, produced a few chipped, mismatched cups, and sat to brewing tea. The tea was strong and, given the surroundings, of unexpectedly good quality. He added a splash of brandy, excellent brandy, far too fine for a place like this. Holmes watched my surprised expression with that faint, knowing half-smile of his. At times I wondered if his whole "you know my methods, Watson" act was merely a disguise for actual, supernatural mind-reading. We sipped in silence for a moment. The warmth seeped back into my fingers, thanks to the combined efforts of the stove and the laced tea. Then Briggs, for that was his name, began his tale, haltingly at first, then with the grim momentum of a confession long suppressed. He worked at the railway, he said. He had taken bribes to misdirect valuable goods to sidings where they quietly vanished. Elias Mallory, as foreman, had caught him forging his signature on the tampered paperwork. Briggs spoke of that moment with a kind of wonted shame. "Elias was a good man," he said. "He caught me dead to rights, but instead of turning me in, he said he'd help me if I came clean." Briggs went on to describe the fatal meeting by the river. Mallory and a tall, broad-shouldered figure a single blow that felled him. Holmes rose slowly, brushing soot from his sleeve. "You will take us there," he said. Briggs looked stricken, but he nodded. There was no refuge left for him in his little room. I finished the last of the tea, the warmth already fading, and took up my cane. Holmes opened the door. The fog pressed in at once, thick and cold as wool, and we followed Briggs back into the chilly night. Briggs led us along the towpath with the slow, defeated tread of a man on the verge of collapse. The fog thickened as we neared the river, gathering in low, shifting falls that clung to the stones. The Thames murmured ahead, a dull, ceaseless whisper against the embankment. He stopped at the narrow gap between two derelict warehouses and gestured weakly. Holmes moved past him without a word, lantern held low. The fog poured thickly in the confined space, swirling around her ankles like smoke. Holmes halted almost at once. A dark stain marked the cobbles. Nearby, the ground bore the signs of struggle. A heel dragged sideways, a deeper indentation where a body had fallen. Holmes crouched, fingertips hovering just above the stone. Briggs's voice came out in a thin, trembling thread. He said he should have spoken sooner. Holmes did not answer, and the silence drew the truth out of him, like a confession at the altar rail. His conscience was weighing heavily on him, but he couldn't risk contacting the police. So he sent a watch to the bereaved brother to arrange a meeting, hoping that with the renowned craftsman's backing he could untangle himself from the stranglehold of corruption. He hesitated, then at last revealed a name: Inspector Harrington. The man who had arranged the bribes and kept the police away from the sidings, smoothed reports, buried questions. Briggs had been a small cog in a quiet, profitable machine. Elias Mallory had gone to Harrington to report what he had learned of the thefts, unaware he was talking to the very ringleader. The inspector had called Elias to the old warehouses, supposedly to investigate, though in truth it was a trap. Briggs described the single blow, the fall, the threats the murderer uttered. He said he had lived in fear every moment since, and that the watch and the note were the only way he could think to bring the truth to light. Holmes listened without comment. The fog pressed close. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Then came a sound that cut through the stillness like a blade. A small metallic click, unmistakable to any man who has heard a revolver made ready. Holmes turned his head slightly. I followed his gaze. A broad-shouldered figure stood at the mouth of the passage, half-formed in the drifting vapor. The outline of a police greatcoat, the dull gleam of a raised revolver. He stepped forward with the unhurried assurance of a man accustomed to command. Briggs sagged against the wall as Flo struck. The inspector gloated at him. "I should have known there was only one way for you to keep silent." Briggs had called in sick that morning. A toothache, he claimed, though Harrington was suspicious when he heard of it. The inspector had come for a health check, to remind him, physically, that silence was vital to his continued health. He arrived at the tea kitchen just as we were leaving. He followed us into the fog, silent as a shadow, and heard every word Briggs poured out on the river stones. He concluded his monologue with a snide remark. Too many accidents are bad for business. But I just read a police report stating that disappearances are on the rise of late. For a moment, none of us moved. The fog pressed close around the inspector, softening his outline, but doing nothing to soften the intent in his posture. The revolver remained steady, a dark, unwavering point in the drifting vapor. Briggs slid down the wall with a low, broken sound. Holmes did not look at him. His attention was fixed entirely on Harrington, as though the man were a specimen under glass. The inspector spoke first, his voice flat and almost bored. "You should have stayed in bed, Briggs." Briggs made a small, helpless noise. Holmes remained motionless. Harrington shifted the revolver slightly. "And you, Mr. Holmes, I will miss your stories, exaggerated as they may be." Holmes laughed at this. "Inspector," he shook his head at me gravely, "you wouldn't believe how often I have asked Watson to stop overinflating my little cases." I grunted at this jibe. "Now, Holmes, of all times?" Harrington shifted his gaze to me, taken aback by this odd interchange. It was all the opening Holmes required. He swung the lantern in a swift arc, striking Harrington a sharp blow to the temple with an audible crack that made me wince. The inspector crumpled without so much as a sound. A couple of days later, after taking tea, Holmes and I sat at the table, each perusing a copy of the Times. The report on Harrington's arrest occupied a modest column: corruption, obstruction, and the death of Elias Mallory. Briggs, it noted, had been dismissed from his post at the railway, but faced no charges, owing to his assistance in securing the inspector's conviction. I suspected the Yard's generosity owed more to Holmes's quiet encouragement than to Briggs's moral courage, and no small amount to their desire to see the whole affair vanish from the public eye. The less said about a corrupt inspector in their ranks, the better for everyone involved. As I folded the paper, a thought struck me. "Holmes, why did you ask Mallory whether his father had made his peace with Elias?" The question had puzzled me at the workshop, but the rush of events had driven it from my mind. For once, Holmes spared me his usual remarks about my supposed blindness to the obvious. He explained readily enough. Elias, as the eldest son, had been expected to inherit the family business, but had never cared for clockmaking. His heart lay with the railways. His father, proud of the family's long tradition of craftsmanship, had taken the disappointment hard. Holmes handed me a small box. Inside lay the worn pocket watch and Mallory's note of thanks. A single line caught my eye, stating he had taken Briggs into his workshop. I looked up. "He's hired Briggs?" Holmes nodded. "Mallory says the man has a natural feel for delicate work. A pity he first applied his talents to such regrettable purposes." I picked up Elias Mallory's battered pocket watch. The mechanism ticked steadily now. Briggs's first task in his new post. I listened for a moment, then closed the case with a soft click. "Some men," I ventured quietly, more to myself, "may not be beyond repair." Holmes regarded me for a moment, then gave a small shrug. "Time will tell." Outside, the bells of St. Marylebone marked the hour, and London resumed its measured ticking. If you've enjoyed tonight's PastRadio broadcast, do leave us a comment. We always value a good word from the audience. And if you'd care to like the program and subscribe to the channel, it helps ensure you'll never miss the next story warming up on the horizon.
Tune in for the next episode at PastRadio.